When it came to the sexual violence that happened on October 7th, it was about annihilation. I think in the beginning, like I said, there was all this trauma. People were really haunted and it just felt impossible for couples. They were telling me personal stories, like they couldn't connect in that way. They couldn't have sex. They couldn't touch. People are starting to see that like this is also part of the fight, that we have to keep going. Our homes need to be filled with light and joy.
Welcome to What Came After. I'm your host, Manya Marcus. On What Came After, we'll take a look at the many ways that people's lives changed on and after the brutal massacre in Israel on October 7th, 2023. We'll be speaking with people in Israel and around the world about how the devastating attack by Hamas has shifted, shaped, and changed them. To learn more about our podcast, please visit us at whatcameafter.com. I'm happy to welcome today's guest, Chana Boteach. Chana was born in Oxford, England. She moved to America as a child, and she is the second child of 9 children. Chana later moved to Israel and served in the Israeli army as a military liaison. She then received a bachelor's in political science and history. Though Chana was initially interested in a political career, she decided to work in the realm of what she describes as sexual politics. To that end, Chana opened a sex shop called, aptly, Kosher Sex. Chana's father, Rabbi Shmuley Boteach, wrote a book by the same name in 2000. The book was an exploration of how Jewish practice and tradition promote healthy sexuality. Chana sells products that affirm the important role of healthy sexuality within Jewish life. Kosher Sex is located in Jerusalem. Today's episode comes with a content warning since it includes a brief discussion of sexual violence. As you'll hear in this episode, Chana seamlessly weaves together her thoughts on October 7th, how to maintain sexuality in such a difficult time, the foundational texts of Judaism, and the role of God right now. Chana.
Hey, Manya.
Thank you so much for joining me.
For sure.
I want to ask you to tell us where we are right now.
Okay, so we are sitting in the Kosher Sex Shop in Jerusalem, a shop that I opened around 5 years ago now. It's part of the company. This is like the headquarters, I would say. For me, it feels like where I sit all day. And the company is a website based on a book that my father wrote, Kosher Sex, 25 years ago. And it kind of fuses our philosophy with products. So it's like we pair products with the message, and then this shop kind of brings them together so that people have access to the products that we're talking about. But that's where we are right now, Kosher Sex Shop.
So I am old enough to remember when your father, Rabbi Shmuley Boteach, actually released this book, and what a marvel it was at the time. And I heard him talk about this store and the website in some subsequent, a recent listening experience. And I immediately started to Google you frantically and to try to find out if you were married, if you fit an Orthodox profile. And people can't see us right now.
No.
But I think it would be nice if you told us a little bit about yourself personally, just to get more context.
Yeah. Where do I begin? So I grew up in Oxford, England. So that's where my dad wrote the book. As a kid, I always wanted to go into the government. That's partly why I moved to Israel. I always wanted to be involved in politics, and Israeli politics fascinated me. And then I came to Israel and I actually studied politics, and I was like, nah, it's not for me. So then I went into sexual politics, which is more my thing. Yeah, so then, no, I'm not married. I'm single. It's like everyone's first question when they walk in here. I guess I'm busy, trying to help everyone else, and I'll get there when I get there. But for now, I live in Israel. I run the shop. I run the company.
It's really fascinating because the genesis of this is a book that was written about how to reconnect with a spouse using the principles of Jewish law.
Yeah.
Right? And so you don't fit this profile, and yet you've really conveyed and brought to life the message.
Yeah.
And I think, as people are talking about what kind of diversity is there really in Israel, there's all kinds of diversity, including the fact that the Kosher Sex Shop is run by this beautiful, unmarried daughter of
Rabbi's daughter.
Right.
Yeah. No, so also growing up, I guess, I grew up in a pretty liberal home, but we're Chabad, and I keep Shabbat, I keep kosher. I consider myself Chabad in terms of like how I relate to my Judaism. Chabad Hasidus is the foundation of how I relate to God in my Judaism. But also I just, I do my own thing. And to me, my relationship with God is the way we relate to God in Hasidus is more of like a personal relationship. So I guess my path is a little bit controversial, or like, it's not so common. But then again, I am my father's daughter. And, I grew up with this message. I grew up seeing couples in and out of my house for counseling. And even as a kid, I was very fascinated by sexuality and intimacy and this deep part of our nature. So it kind of feels like a calling to me. But it's a good question, because I think even the work I do is a little bit cathartic. Like I too am going through this journey of discovering, the secrets of intimacy and what works. And everyone has their issues, and I got mine. So, just going with it, seeing where it takes me.
So one thing that's also notable as we sit across from each other is that you have a yellow band around your wrist that says "Bring
Yes.
them home." It's a reminder of the war. And it was a notable reminder walking into
Yeah.
this store, as I did a few weeks ago, and just knowing that the war doesn't fall away at the door.
Yeah.
And that's really what I want to talk to you about today, is how October 7th and the war has impacted your sense of, I don't want to say national sexuality. That would be a bit overarching. But what are the trends that you've seen? How did you relate to your line of work when the war started? And how did that evolve?
Right. My work is so centered around sexual healing and uplifting sex and making it something holy and a connecting force. And after October 7th, honestly, aside from the horror we saw and that's ongoing with our hostages still being held, specifically when it came to sex, it was pretty brutal for me. I actually just wrote an article about this, but the macro trauma that we felt as a people, and especially as women, hearing the testimony of the sexual violence that we know happened. And this wasn't just, here's the thing. So sexual violence is really, it's not sex. It's a distortion of sex. It's more about power. And here, especially when it came to the sexual violence that happened on October 7th, it was about annihilation. Like it wasn't just women. Men were shot in the genitals, just horrific things that are really traumatic even to hear. But from the horror that we heard about, that we witnessed, that we saw footage of, it was like, it felt impossible for me to work. I felt really haunted, honestly. And sex is also a very delicate subject because, these days we act like it's all casual, like go with it, relax. And to me, there's really you can approach sex in a casual way, but it's not casual. It's a very deep part of our nature. And I think it hits something very deep in our psyche and our soul. But I think there was really widespread trauma and devastation after October 7th. And I felt it here. Obviously, Israel kind of shut down a little bit. Well, completely. Like I closed the shop. I couldn't even bear to talk about it, to do videos, to do anything on social media. It was just, it felt like sex it just felt very devastating, very desecrated to me. Yeah, and like I said, I also saw it in customers. Like the shop was shut down, and then but even when I reopened it, it was like people would enter, and it's like all we just looked at each other, and people were just in this like, is this real? Did this really happen? And then trying to connect with your partner is a whole nother story. I had a lot of people reaching out to me through social media to kind of just get some guidance on like, what do we do? How do we have sex? Just all these issues. Because also people relate to this kind of trauma. Some people want to connect even more because the sense of loneliness and isolation is there. And then other people are like, they can't even bear to broach the subject, let alone be touched or touch. So it was really haunting, actually. The fact that the hostages are still there and we know what's being done to them, I feel like there hasn't even been time to really mourn. Because, mourning is, in Judaism, mourning is really important. It's part of the healing process. And I don't think we as a people even got a chance to mourn. It was like straight to battle. I don't know, the mind, this is just a lot to absorb and process. And I think it's taken a huge toll on our sex lives, especially.
You and I spoke when I first came in about different stages that you see of people's sexuality. And now that this war has gone on for 9
Yeah.
months, what did you see at the beginning as it became clear that this was a real war? It wasn't just a terror attack that we were
Yeah.
going to bounce back from quickly. Who was coming in and how has that changed?
Right. So this is actually what's really beautiful because it's been almost a year of the war, but I'm starting to really see a shift in the approach and what's happening in here. And it's actually really beautiful. And I'm happy that we're having this conversation now and not just like maybe a few months ago before I saw this shift, because it was a somber, really heavy feeling, especially when it came to intimacy and sex and just even being in the shop, like the conversations I was having. But now I'm seeing something really beautiful where I think in the beginning, like I said, there was all this trauma. People were really haunted and it just felt impossible for couples. They were telling me personal stories like they couldn't connect in that way. They couldn't have sex, they couldn't touch. Even people were told me they were having, flashbacks to footage and images they saw because the stuff that was going around, it is traumatic, but I think it's important that we are there to bear witness to what happened there and we can't ignore it. And then we have the whole world denying it, which is, to add the most sickening insult to injury. But so in the beginning, yeah, I think people were really struggling. And now I'm starting to see that, time does heal a little bit, I would say. But the fact that the hostages are still there, so there's a lot of, it's fresh every day. But I think that there's some kind of almost this new will that's coming into being where people are deciding that like it's time, we've been fighting for so long and there is a little bit of exhaustion. But I think that couples are starting to really realize that one of the ways that Jews have always gotten through is that we connect and we create. And sex in Judaism is actually not just for procreation. It's not just about creation. It's about connection. So I think that I'm starting to see a really beautiful shift in people coming in and being like, you know what? This is our history, and this is actually nothing new to us. October 7th, our history is just full of horrific sexual violence, actually, especially against Jewish women. And I think people are starting to see that, like, this is also part of the fight, that we have to keep going. Our homes need to be filled with light and joy. And that's really what we Jews have to do. It's not, people are having less children, people are not getting married as much. And that's also part of the continuation of the Jewish people. And it's important that people are still connecting and still having children, but even having sex, that is its own creation in itself, that connection. Yeah, so I'm seeing that shift. It's really, really beautiful.
It's really fascinating and it's really helpful to hear that there has been this turn of the tide.
Yes, a turn of the tide.
What you're saying about us being stuck and unable to mourn
Yeah,
and the paralysis, this feels like a shift against that. And I like that.
yeah, yeah,
Gives
yeah.
me hope.
It feels like hope. And I was scared it was just going to get worse and worse because I can't describe. It was like the sense in Israel was, right after the war was like, we're going to fight, b'yachad naseach, together we're going to win. But there was this sense of like just such heavy sadness. I'd never experienced anything like it. Like really a sense of hopelessness because as much as we were fighting, it's every day you're like, it can't get any crazier. And then it gets crazier. Like this is not just the war. This is what's happening on social media, the Jews being assaulted in New York and California on college campuses. It's like from every end. So that hopelessness, I'm starting to see a lot of healing. And in this shop, it's been really comforting to see. And I just wanted to add, I want to throw in something that I read that was really wild for me because it's kind of like this parallel from 3,000 years ago to today. But I was reading, so I think it was around Passover time, it had to be. This was like 6 months after the war started. And I was, it's been rough. It's been a lot of ups and downs emotionally. And especially this shop. This shop is actually a really intimate place. And I think that's what makes it special because most sex shops are like, seedy and dark, and people just want to get the hell out of there. They want to get their stuff and get out. But here I feel like it's a safe space and people really open up. People get very intimate here and it can actually get a little heavy sometimes. And since this whole world, like I've had people cry in here. But anyway, so I was looking into the story of Passover And I was learning about how there's this teaching that says in the merit of Jewish women that we were redeemed from Egypt,
Hmm.
which is wild. The men of the time, so Pharaoh had put them into backbreaking labor, but it wasn't just their bodies that were physically broken from the pain of the work, but it was their spirits and specifically their libidos.
Hmm.
Their sex drive was just, it was killed. They were not just, it wasn't just the backbreaking labor of Pharaoh was killing all of their sons. They were being thrown into the Nile. So these men were like, they separated from their wives, they distanced themselves, and they're like, we're not having sex. There's no point. It's just going to result in children. They're going to get killed. And also, we're not feeling it. And it was the women who would go to their husbands and seduce them and flirt with them and tease them. And it said they would take them under the shade of apple trees and they would take these mirrors and they would do this little flirting thing where they were like, oh, I'm so much cuter than you. I'm way more attractive than you. And just like bring them back to life a little bit. And these mirrors actually ended up being used in the temple for the wash basin that would purify the priests before they did their service in the temple. And when Moses was talking about constructing the temple and telling all the Jews to bring all of the supplies, the women brought these mirrors. And Moses initially was like, no, like we can't use these because they were tools for vanity and for seduction. And that's how we think of sex now. That's considered like inappropriate, dirty, whatever. I know that Moses said dirty, but he said he wanted to reject them. And God himself said to Moses, accept these mirrors because they are dearer to me than anything. So I'm seeing in this shop, I'm telling you, it's like 3,000 years later. I would say it's interesting because I do get a lot of women coming in. Now I'm starting to see a lot of women coming in buying gifts for their husbands. They always say, I want something that's gonna be fun for him, that's gonna be exciting for him, that's gonna, uplift him.
And does this feel like a function of the fact that many men are currently
Yes,
coming back
for
and
sure.
commuting to and from a war?
For sure, 1,000%. Like a lot of them are soldiers' wives, and they're saying that their husbands are going back and forth from this reality of war. This is not some just operation that we just tolerate, and this is like all out war. And soldiers are dying, and people are seeing horrific, terrible things, and their wives are by themselves raising their kids. This reality is just really unbearable, and I've spoken to even soldiers who come in here, soldiers' wives who say that, they see this change in their husbands when they go back and forth, going from this reality to that one. Neither is easy in its own way. And a lot of them, they've said that like their sex drive has really taken a hit. They're exhausted, they're emotionally exhausted, physically exhausted, mentally exhausted. And these women are stepping in. And I think also that's a really Jewish concept. In Judaism, sex is really centered around the woman. And I don't think there's enough of that in the world. Like in the rest of the world, like men have the reins on sexuality. And they've done some damage, honestly. They've like run it into the ground. And I think that this shift is really powerful because I think women are taking the reins a little bit, just like they did 3,300 years ago. Jewish women are doing the same thing.
So
And I
people
think
can't
it's
see me because
wild.
we're audio only, but my
Yeah,
jaw just keeps dropping. I
it's
mean, we're in this sex
amazing.
shop. You're giving me incredible wisdom from our tradition, Torah, really.
Yeah, straight out of the Torah. Yeah.
And we're having a really, I think, high level discussion about gender and sexuality and war and how creation is not just about procreation.
Hmm.
And I'm also very interested in this thing that you're describing, where initially men were coming home and sex was the outlet, right? And the women
Yes.
may have been exhausted by this abrupt new reality of having to manage a home. And now the men are reflecting what happened in Egypt, right? Where their libidos are starting to fail. And now it's really on women to see if they can help resuscitate
Yeah.
this essential part of our lives.
In the beginning, it was the women who were very traumatized by the sexual violence. And then now they're the ones also bringing it back to life, which is really beautiful because, like I said, that's what Hamas was trying to do. They were trying to annihilate. And sex is life force. And in Judaism, like I said, sex is life. And we are told always, like the foundation of Judaism is we choose life. And we have never seen this so glaring. This is a culture war of choosing life and choosing death. And it's just so clear. I literally feel like I'm seeing people choosing life. and choosing to connect and choosing to be together. This is our history. And I think it's a little scary because in some ways I look at it, I'm like, is this loop ever going to end? It's just the same thing for thousands of years where God brings this upon us. I have no idea, but he does, and God's in control. It's Hamas and everything, but that God allows this to happen, I don't know. It's really been a struggle for me to kind of wrap my head around feeling like trusting God right now after everything that happened. But this is just our reality as Jews. And we're no different from any other generation. This is kind of deep, but this is actually one of my favorite stories and something that gives me so much comfort. I don't want to butcher it, but there's a story about Rabbi Akiva. After it was the destruction of the second temple, and he sees that the temple is completely destroyed, it's rubble, and he sees a fox walking over, I think, where the Holy of Holies once stood. I think the other rabbis were mourning and crying, and Rabbi Akiva starts to laugh. And they say, like, Rabbi Akiva, why are you laughing? This is like devastation. This is the end. And he said, because the earlier prophets once spoke of how there would be total destruction and that animals were going to be roaming around the rubble of our temple. But then if we know that happens, then we also know that the prophecies of the redemption are also true. If this is really happening, then so is the redemption. If one is true, then the other has to be true. October 7th, to me, feels like it was like a destruction of the temple. This was like, it was a destruction on a level that I still can't really process, I can't believe this happened. But then I know that the promises of redemption must be true as well. And I'm starting to see that healing. And I really think that sex is a part of that. Couples connecting, couples choosing life, choosing to live, despite everyone wanting death for us. Yeah. Let's keep doing it. Yeah.
There's the quote. There's the pull quote.
It's just, yeah.
Keep doing it.
Keep doing it.
Chana, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
This was really wonderful. I'm so glad that we made this work.
Yeah.
And I'll let people know where to visit you when we link to it on the site. This is a really, really nice space. I hope people can make it here.
Lanya. Yeah, come on over.
She steps lightly on the earth at a quicker pace. Oh, she's not running or walking, she's finding herself in the rain. Moments in time, they disperse in a bitter haze. Not wanting to answer to those coming in first place. She couldn't be controlled, they snatched her, tried to take away her name and laughter, told her to cover up thereafter. Who could expose that force that's faster? The whole world shook when they attacked her, sending up her spirit to the sun. What have they done? They march, brave ones, women, life, freedom, daughters and sons, women, life, freedom. They march, brave ones, women, life, freedom, daughters and sons, women, life, freedom. A mother says in love and trust, I'm going so when you grow up, you won't have to hide and feel shame. So let's take to the streets and fight for our peace, shouting it loud, we're gonna be free, for the right to choose, the right to believe in our liberty. If she screams, she is the enemy. Tape her mouth and force serenity. On the ground and breathing heavily, starts to rise and stands up steadily. Eyes are closed as she hums the melody, sending up a message to the sun. We're not done. March, brave ones, women, life, freedom, daughters and sons, women, life, freedom. They march, brave ones. steps slightly on the earth at a quicker pace. She's not running or walking, she's finding herself in the race.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe to What Came After wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us online at whatcameafter.com.